While I understand there are those in horror who really dig the ultra gore, I also understand that it's not for everyone. But sometimes, ultra gore and semi mainstream horror converge, and the masses react big time to it. Terrifier is a phenomenon. It's an extreme reaction to what should have been an underground movie, but because there really wasn't anything out there mixing slasher tropes and ultra gore, it stood out as something new and fresh in the genre that is always in danger of playing it safe. And then Damien Leone went and made the sequel better. Here's my number 2 pick for the Best in Horror Countdown, Terrifier 2. This is ML Miller Fright's Best in Horror Countdown 2022 through 2023. Counting down the best in horror within the window of October 1st, 2022 through September 30th, 2023.
Number 2.
Terrifier 2 was released October 6th, 2022. It's streaming on Screambox and Tubi.
Terrifier 2 is directed and written by Damien Leone. When we last saw Art the Clown, played by David Howard Thornton, he was showing a slight sign of life on the coroner's slab, indicating that the sadistic clown would live on to mutilate and murder another day. Well, that day has come, as the story basically picks up immediately after the last film ends. After some initial carnage, Terrifier 2 introduces Sienna, played by Lauren Lavera, an angsty teen with quite the artistic talent at making her own costumes for Halloween. Sienna's father suffered from mental illness, which ended up killing him and scarring Sienna and her little brother, Jonathan, played by Elliot Fulham, with their own mental fallout to deal with. As Halloween approaches, both Sienna and Jonathan feel something sinister is looming in the periphery. And they're right, as Art the Clown has set his sights on both of them. Terrifier 2 is Damien Leone's epic return to the gory world of Art the Clown. While this is the second feature film featuring Art, it's his fourth appearance in a movie, as he appeared in both of the All Hallows Eve anthologies. But Leone knew he had a hit on his hands with Art, giving him his own splattery movie in 2016, which, because of Terrifier's appearance on Netflix, became a cult hit. Leone promised bigger and better things for Art in Terrifier 2, and man does he deliver with a monster of a movie weighing in at a whopping 2 hours and 20 minutes. Still, I never felt much of a lag, as Terrifier 2 really stands out as a movie that never lets a second go by without a moment of mystery, suspense, or absolute carnage. And wow, the carnage. So when I first watched the original Terrifier, I called it a mean-spirited movie. I felt a lot of the kills weren't just gratuitous, but horribly disturbing and extremely violent. I'm no prude or couch fanner, folks. I've watched some extremely horrifying things in my time. I've seen many outlaw films that at some time were mistaken for snuff films. I've seen The Bunny Game, the Vomit Gore trilogy, and many of the extreme Asian torture porn films. But with Terrifier, there's a level of filmmaking craftsmanship that elevated it past underground schlock. It had some of the most extreme gore I'd seen in a film of that budget. Leone almost did too good a job at making Art a horrible monster you love to hate. With Terrifier 2, Leone makes Art the Clown's intentions much more developed and clear, but also gorier. What distinguishes him from the rest of the slashers out there is that he not only kills people, he plays with them like a kid taking apart a radio. He just breaks and rips things from a body. He just kind of pokes around and has fun with his victims. And it's downright disturbing. Seeing the black and white clown spattered with blood is like he is wearing his victims' bodily fluids as trophies, and we're all his toys. Terrifier 2's carnage seeks to top the upside-down hacksaw kill from the original, and does in a few key scenes of gratuitous graphic murder that will be sure to turn a stomach or two. Leone, who also does the gory effects of Terrifier 2, has topped himself by having Art slop around in the grossness. One scene towards the middle of the film hit me on such a shocking level, I had to stop and take a second to absorb it all. It's that effective, not only highlighting the horror of the act, but the devastation of a human body on a level so depraved it can't be unseen. But as gory as Terrifier 2 is, The film dazzles during the more subtler scenes. There's a scene where Art is stalking Sienna in a costume shop that highlights Art's more clowny antics. Leone and Thornton, as Art, exhibit their perfect comic timing here. Yes, it's scary, but the tension-filled build-up is hilarious. Another aspect of a more subtler horror is the presence of a little dead girl, played by Georgia McPhail, who can only be seen by a select few, Art being one of them. Dressed in a garb that resembles Art's clown costume, this little urchin is a wonderfully spooky addition to the Terrifier world. The makeup appliances to the woman who survived an attack by Art from the previous film is unsettling as all get out as well. It shows that Leone is not only skilled in dousing the screen in blood, but excels in amping the feelings of fear and unease through timing and unsettling imagery. On top of it all, Leone has a great choice when it comes to actresses leading his past two films. Terrifier not only has some gorgeous women, but super talented women as well as leads. Terrifier 2 tops itself with the gorgeous and charismatic Lauren Lavera. She really has the chops and stands her ground against Art's more manic antics, never being overshadowed by him. Lavera is definitely easy on the eyes, but she also has the grit to get gory and brutal when needs be. She's a hell of a final girl, and one I hope returns for the inevitable Terrifier 3. Did I ever notice the 2-hour plus runtime? Sure I did, but I wasn't ever bored. The extended runtime allows Leone to really let some of these scenes play out, including the costume store sequence, the gory bedroom murder, and some of the more comical moments with Art and the little demon girl. The climactic battle between Art and Sienna did feel a little drawn out, but it also allowed for a very dramatic clash between good and evil. Plus, the extended post-credit sequence opens the door for new and nightmarish horrors to come. Leone doesn't really play by any rules with the Terrifier universe. There's a nightmare logic that only makes sense to the most twisted and fractured of minds. Is it all a fever dream? A manic PTSD episode? Or can Art be born and reborn all over again? This movie just doesn't happen in the world we live in. While you'll need a strong constitution, no one is making horror like Damien Leone these days. It's bold and brash at times, yet subtly unusual at others. You're in for a full and terrifying experience if you dare see Terrifier 2. You've been warned.
While it was just edged off the countdown this year, I had to mention that Hellraiser did have a reboot of sorts. While it wasn't for everyone, it still was one of the better Hellraiser sequels, rebootquels, and hopefully we'll get more in the future of this caliber. Hellraiser was released on October 6th, 2022. It's streaming on Hulu.
It's directed by David Bruckner and written by Ben Collins, Luke Piotrowski, and David S. Goyer. Riley, played by Odessa Azion, is a directionless addict. Her brother Matt, played by Brandon Flynn, his boyfriend Colin, played by Adam Faison, and their roommate Nora, played by Aof Hines, are trying to help her rehabilitate herself. But Riley's boyfriend Trevor, played by Drew Starkey, drives her back to the drugs and a life of crime whenever she sees him. After she begins using again, Matt kicks Riley out of the apartment, and Riley, with no place to go, shacks up with Trevor and gets involved in a robbery that takes place within an abandoned storage crate. Inside the crate is a single safe, and inside of that safe is a box that those who have seen any Hellraiser movie will recognize. Once in possession of this box, Riley begins fiddling with it, opens it, and unleashes the Hell Priests, aka Cenobites, and opening the gates to Leviathan, the omnipotent embodiment of hell itself. Meanwhile, a millionaire named Voight, played by Goran Visnid, seeks to open the box to gain power like he's never imagined before. Had I written my Hellraiser review directly after seeing it, the film probably would have gotten a sparkling, knob-slobbering review from me. I'd seen The Night House, David Bruckner's previous film, that was originally supposed to be a Hellraiser script. And that's what really had me jazzed for what the filmmaker would bring to a straightforward Hellraiser adaptation. But now that I have some distance from the film, I see its faults, but still want to recognize it for what it is. Finally, a well-made Hellraiser film. It's not the best, You can't top the original and major parts of Hellbound, but Hellraiser 2022 does do quite a lot right. I loved it that Bruckner took his time developing the story for a new generation. He didn't just assume everyone would have seen the original and the million and one iterations of the original short story by Clive Barker from comics, figures, and film sequels. He introduces us to real characters with real problems and then tosses in the Hellraiser lore, allowing the viewer to understand the rules of the box, the Cenobites, and Leviathan in small, digestible chunks. It feels Bruckner has put a lot of thought into how Barker crafted the original and wanted to follow that attention to character first in this story. He also brought a lot of the lore from other media to this film, really personalizing each character's desire to open the box and matching that to a specific configuration of the puzzle. That's some deep lore, and having digested all things Hellraiser in all media, that type of attention to detail not only opens up the series for much more story potential, but also impressed this Uber fan greatly. I also like the added aspect of bleeding on the box and how that signs a pact with it, the blood being a major component in the original in order for desires and wishes to be granted. Hellraiser 2022 oversimplifies this concept, but still doesn't ignore it altogether. I love the designs of the new Cenobites. While much has been said about the new Pinhead, I have to say, while Jamie Clayton did a fine job, the Cenobites weren't on screen enough for me to form an opinion for or against their performances. That's not a complaint, though, because if you look back at those first two movies, the Cenobites are not in the film very much at all either. If there's a complaint about the Cenobites, it's not about the casting. It would be about the poor lighting and lack of attention to detail for each of their twisted forms. You see, in the 80s and 90s, they were a time of true artistic craftsmanship in horror. The entire momentum of the film would stop and the camera would linger on the latest gore effect or monster makeup by Tom Savini or KNB or Screaming Mad George or John Carl Buechler. The list goes on of superstar makeup artists who really made monster making an art form. And the movies knew the horror audience loved it by slowing the cuts down and giving a somewhat clear shot of the effects for the fans. Unfortunately, Hellraiser 2022 doesn't really do that. There are hints at weirdness going on. I think I understood the concept of the asphyx, with its lungs stretched out of its back and over its head, causing it to wheeze and hardly breathe. I really had no clue what was going on with the gasp or the weeper, but I dug what I could see of their designs. The mask was a cool design for what I saw of him, and the mother was barely in the whole damn movie. And it was nice to see a new, more feral version of the Chatterer. But while Barker paraded out his Cenobites for all to see, proudly displaying their highly detailed garbs and wounds in bright lights, Bruckner chose not to linger and only give the audience glimpses of the Hell Priest's horrors. As a horror and Hellraiser fan, I was disappointed. One of the things I think Bruckner and his team of writers got wrong is that there really isn't supposed to be that many innocents in a Hellraiser movie. The term good guy really has no place in this world. And while the original and the first sequel had a pair of final girls in Christy Cotton and the autistic Tiffany, the rest of the people around them were awful examples of human beings. In the original Hellraiser, the humans were the monsters. The Cenobites were just doing their jobs they were designed to do. In Hellraiser 2022, the Cenobites definitely are the monsters here, with Riley and her friends only being guilty of being slackers and hipsters. Unfortunately, even though I think she was a good actress, I found Odessa Azion's Riley to be annoying and frustratingly spoiled. She's an addict and a whiner, but not a sinner. And while these aren't ultimate sins, they did hinder me from really getting into her character. The same goes for her poorly developed friends, who were there to represent groups rather than play a part in the story. None of them were really bad people, but none of them had the complex layering of evil that you see in most Clive Barker films. Sure, Voight was a bastard, but he was only in the movie at the beginning and the end. In the original, the sinful relationship between Frank and Julia was front and center. Larry was bitter for being a pushover and a cuckold. Even Christy, while the most innocent, seemed to have a dark side. I wish Bruckner would have had the guts to make the protagonists monstrous, as it has always been an integral part of Barker lore. There was also a stank on the original Hellraiser that felt shocking, fresh, and downright dangerous to watch. While BDSM can be seen worn on the streets today, believe it or not, those leather garments were downright shocking back in the day. I didn't want a repeat of the S&M wear, and I think using body modification as an alternative was a good step, but I wish the film would have taken the body horror to the next level and really given us something that felt as dangerous as the original film did. Again, maybe it was there and the editors refused to keep it in, or maybe the lighting hindered shots of some really uncomfortable stuff going on. But everything about Hellraiser, from the trashy romance between Julia and Frank to the design of the Cenobites, felt trend-setting and taboo. 2022's Hellraiser came up light in that aspect. The climax gets really messy. With the cast spread out and so many of them alive, it requires some of the cast to wait and kick the dirt while other necessary scenes need to happen. Riley is off trying to save her brother's lover, while Voight and Riley's boyfriend really are just sitting around and bleeding, waiting for her to return. The Cenobots are literally waiting on the periphery for some kind of force field to be let down. This lack of anything to do for a large chunk of the cast in the climax just feels like the script needed more passes to get it right. As it is presented, it felt sloppy and not really well thought out. While the very end felt poetic and actually resonated with me quite a bit, enduring that mishmash climax made the trip to the end a really rough ride. I prefer Bruckner's much more subtle take on the lore in The Night House, and if you haven't seen it, fans of Hellraiser really should check that one out. While it's not a dedicated sequel to the series, you can tell how that movie could have easily been one of its more effective installments. It's quite awesome. I guarantee Bruckner's original take on Hellraiser 2022 was most likely a little more subversive than the movie we all saw, but studio intervention made Bruckner amp up certain cashable aspects like making the Cenobites serve a more monstrous role in the film and heightening the spectacle of it all. Still, the original was a simple haunted house movie and really didn't have a lot of bells and whistles to it other than an intricately blueprinted story and lore full of imagination and potential. I think a less ambitious and more subdued story would have made Hellraiser 2022 a much stronger outing, but with folks relying on this film to be a major reboot and refreshening of the Hellraiser property, something big and bawding had to be done, so I understand the movie we got. Now that I've gotten that out of me, I do have to say that despite all of these gripes, this is my third favorite Hellraiser movie, and maybe my second. It has its faults, but I'll watch this one before I revisit Hell on Earth and all of the Hell sequels that came after that. I hope Bruckner decides to revisit the Hellraiser series because some of the designs were on point and he's got a lot of the lore right. It ain't perfect, but for a movie series like Hellraiser, it's one of the best. I know that's not saying much, but for me, I was glad to see what I saw of the Box, Leviathan, and the Cenobites in Hellraiser 2022.
As always, feel free to agree, disagree, or how about you play along at home and give me your own picks for your favorite horror movies. It's October, so let's talk horror. Come back tomorrow for the next level in the Best in Horror Countdown. Be sure to hit all of those pertinent bells and whistles down below, and you'll never miss a post. Happy Halloween, folks.